Now, a Local 5 and CW Iowa 23 special presentation. Our Hidden History, honoring Black history in Central Iowa.
History is meant to be studied so we can learn, grow, and most of all, not repeat our failures and mistakes. Over the years, these beautiful oak, walnut, and hickory trees have witnessed the changes, struggles, and triumphs of Iowans and those trying to escape enslavement in the South. This used to be considered the edge of white civilization. Now it's the heart of West Des Moines. The Jordan House is one of the oldest buildings in Polk County, and its story reveals Iowa's hidden history. Hello, I'm Elias Johnson, and I am pleased to bring you the stories of the past that shape us into who we are today. If you take a look around this home, it is steeped with history, a home to a large family who built this beautiful Victorian home with their own hands. If you've been to Des Moines, you've likely heard of Jordan Creek or Jordan Creek Parkway. It's because James Jordan was one of the first settlers here in Central Iowa, and this house was one of the most famous stops on the Underground Railroad.
James Jordan was a very hospitable man. He came from a family in Virginia, and one of the things that he did when he was probably a teenager was he had to catch runaway slaves and return them to their owners. That was part of his job because, of course, Virginia was a slave state, and that's probably where he learned to really abhor slavery. When they started this house and dug the basement where we are now, there were no bulldozers or backhoes or anything. They had to do it with a shovel. The famous abolitionist John Brown brought slaves from his staging area in Tabor, Iowa, and he brought them through here. We have one case documented where he brought 13 slaves through. If you were caught harboring a slave or helping in their escape, there were severe penalties. Plus, the bounty hunters or the slave hunters could do just about anything they wanted to your house and possessions in order to capture those runaway slaves. So it was very serious business. They weren't really free, even though Iowa was a free state. They weren't free until they set foot in Canada. We still have racial issues in this country, and I think it's very important for people to see and really be able to touch and experience what that was like for the slaves as they tried to reach freedom.
You just heard the name John Brown. He was an abolitionist who fought to free the slaves, and when we say fought, we mean every word. He gave this gun to James Jordan as a gift, and he was a very violent man, not afraid to kill slave owners and fight for what he believed in. There is a saying that goes, one man's hero is another man's terrorist. And on that note, we welcome in Gail Brubaker with the West Des Moines Historical Society to learn more about John Brown, who we know was here at least twice.
Yes, he came through. James Jordan and his family and the neighbors were very well-known abolitionists and part of the Underground Railroad. It was really an open secret in the community, and they really supported John Brown and what he was doing.
Now, back in those days, Brown would have been considered pretty progressive as far as what he believed in, both with slaves as well as women as well.
Yes, he was really radical. He not only believed that African Americans were equal to white, he had the crazy notion that women were equal to men and really campaigned for their right to vote. So, very radical.
He was outspoken and able to connect with a lot of people. In today's terms, I think we've heard he'd be the king of social media. How so?
He really understood the power of the media, and he used it to his advantage. He really set up a lot of interviews with East Coast and Midwestern newspaper editors, including the Des Moines Register's editor at the time. He knew that if he got his story out, what he was doing, the stories of these women and children that he was helping lead to safety and to freedom, people would send him money. That's how he was able to afford things like horses and guns and ammunition, including this gift of the gun that he gave to James Jordan.
Which very well, we don't know for sure, but could have been used at some point. And he was very open about bragging to people that he would use violence to carry out what he believed in.
Mr. Jordan was a very firm Methodist. He was not a violent person by any means. John Brown, on the other hand, really believed that he was the hand of God and had Jehovah's ability to come down and punish those who were evil enough to own another human being. So he is still very reviled down south in the Mason-Dixon. We do get people here on tours from the south, and when I ask if they know about John Brown, they say, oh, that dirty thief. But that is the truth of the matter. If we're talking about hero versus terrorist, the dichotomy of humanity, John Brown was a terrorist. He was a murderer. It was for a cause that, of course, we believe was right and honorable, but was it right the way that he went around it? And that's also a lesson we talk about with James Jordan. He was breaking a federal law by helping the slaves escape. He was taking a real risk for himself and his family, but he believed so strongly in this abolitionist cause that he went ahead and did it.
And just how serious of a risk are we talking? What were the penalties that John Brown and Mr. Jordan were facing had they been caught?
Well, John Brown paid the ultimate price, didn't he? After the raid on Harper's Ferry, he was executed for what he did, for trying to incite violence. The Jordan family would have risked several months, if not years, in a federal prison, several $1,000s in fines, which don't sound like that much to us today, but in the terms of the day, that was a very significant financial setback.
And so when you look at the chapters and the story written on the Underground Railroad, and even as far up here as central Iowa, this is indeed a very important chapter in that history.
This is a very important chapter, and the Jordan House is such a unique location. It's the only central Iowa spot that's open to the public that is part of the Underground Railroad Freedom Network. So we're just so thrilled to be able to preserve this critical piece of central Iowa, and in fact, U.S. history.
Well, Gail Brubaker with the West Des Moines Historical Society, we certainly thank you for your time and sharing with us this history.
Thank you for coming.
Now to the story of one of the first African Americans to ever attend Iowa State College, and the very first to ever be called a Cyclone football player. By now you may have heard the name Jack Trice, but do you know the full story of the man who was willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice and ended up doing so, and along the way, helped pave the way for future generations? Long before the first snap is ever taken, and well beyond the last game of every season, the name of one player reigns high above.
The Jack Trice story is one about a hero.
Biographer Steve Jones knows the story well of the first African-American football player in Iowa State history who broke through the color barrier in 1923, 24 years before Jackie Robinson did the same in professional baseball.
You got to put it in context with the times. 1923, racism was rampant. Jack Trice could not have played football just anywhere, but his high school coach came to Iowa State, became the head coach, brought some players along, including Jack Trice. Freshman didn't compete in his first year, but his second year, he immediately established himself as a star on the line.
The story of Trice has been a source of inspiration for many players who have tried to follow in his footsteps, like Carlos Blunt, who played for the Cyclones shortly after the stadium was officially renamed to honor the football hero in 1997, thanks to a major push by the student body.
When we got a chance to choose our numbers, I wanted to emulate, try to follow those footsteps to take take it to the next level. So I chose number 37 because Jack Trice wore number 37. He was animal husbandry was his degree, and ag biz was my degree. So there's a lot of correlations there.
Trice's legacy centers around the second game of his college career, a contest that took the Cyclones north against the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
As best as we can tell, Jack Trice was staying at a different hotel from his team. At about dinner time, they had a team meal at the hotel. One of the players came in late, and he sits down and he notices something's not right. And then he says, "Where's Jack?" Well, he learned that the hotel would not allow Jack in the dining room.
He wasn't a part of the team, even though he was the man on the team. He couldn't be a part of that. Today, that's a big part of any athlete's preparation, is being a part of that brotherhood. Jack Trice couldn't be a part of that brotherhood, yet he still had to go out and execute and perform.
The game itself proved as difficult as the Cyclones had prepared for, tied 7-7 at halftime, with Trice playing on the defensive line, and some accounts claiming he was repeatedly targeted by opposing players.
And then all of a sudden, one play in the third quarter up there changed everything for Iowa State. The ball went one way. Jack Trice came in there, and as best as we could tell, he tried to do a roll block. That was an unsafe play and not even taught at that time. A roll block is you go in there, you roll yourself into the blockers go down, the other defenders make the tackle. What we think happened is that Jack Trice tried the roll block, but instead of ending up on his stomach, he ended up on his back, leaving his torso exposed. After a big pileup, players get up, and all of a sudden they realize, hey, Jack is still on the field.
His response to that was to get up and go back for his team. They had to make him, they had to take him off the field, make him stop playing. It wasn't about him, it was about the team.
Trice was sent to an area hospital where he was treated and released. 2 days later, on October 8, 1923, he died from injuries received in the game. Prior to his funeral on the Iowa State campus, a note was discovered inside one of Trice's suit coats, written on hotel stationery the night before the game.
My thoughts just before the first real college game of my life. The honor of my race, family, and self is at stake. Everyone is expecting me to do big things. I will. My whole body and soul are to be thrown recklessly about the field tomorrow. Every time the ball is snapped, I will be trying to do more than my part. On all defensive plays, I must break through the opponent's line and stop the play in their territory. Beware of mass interference, fight low with your eyes open and towards the play. Watch out for cross bucks and reverse end runs. Be on your toes every minute if you expect the good. Jack.
When I first read a note, and the times we read it, before game, pre-game, or just doing practice, it spoke a lot to his integrity and character. Again, I go back to this was not about a football game for him. This was about a legacy that he knew that he was starting out on. And
that note has forever been one of the most enduring pieces of Iowa State history.
Encapsulated in time just outside the gates of the stadium named in his honor, the legacy of Jack Trice lives on.
Here we have the only major college football stadium in America named after an African American, and I think that's significant. Once again, we can't overemphasize how important it was that here was a man who dedicated himself in a time when he was not welcome to play at every university in America, and then died in the process. So I think it's very, very fitting that this stadium bears his name.
Jack Trice, his vision was paramount and surpassed anyone's vision today, let alone by that time. He was not thinking about the football game. He was thinking about Carlos Blunt. He was thinking about Hiawatha Rutland. He was thinking about Coach Mack. He was thinking about all the opportunities that laid ahead of him. He knew that what he was doing, he was, as he said, he was a pioneer in this field and what he was trying to accomplish. He wasn't doing it for himself.
Next, the role the mighty Mississippi played in the 1800s was more than just economic, why some historians call it the River of Freedom when Hidden History returns. Welcome back. Take a look at this piano behind me. It's over 150 years old and one of the original pieces that was likely here when the Jordans called this place their own. Now the shape of it lets us know just how old it is. Rectangular and non-traditional, that made it easier to be put on ships and wagons and brought across the frontier. But while the Jordans were enjoying lavish things like pianos and carpets shipped from places like England, others were in a fight for survival, and navigating the terrain meant the difference between slavery and freedom. One part of the Mississippi River represented something worlds away, a chance at freedom, a river of change.
Carrying every drop of water that flows down 2/3 the continent.
From Minnesota to Louisiana, spanning more than 2,000 miles long. It's the nation's longest river, with a history much deeper than the water itself. The Mississippi was the main artery of America's pre-railroad economy, transporting boatfuls of cash crops and the slaves who tended them during the early 1800s.
And when it landed in New Orleans. They were the colored people's soul age.
But one of its narrowest points stood for something completely different.
A piece of Louisiana land, which has been referred to as Free Negro Point. Now, Negro was not the word that was used to identify the area.
Historian Dr. Don Hernandez says this part of the river represented not bondage, but opportunity.
Apparently, here on the bluff, there was a large plantation. Because it was a large plantation, there would have been slaves. History reports that people who were enslaved and who were working in this area from time to time sought their freedom by escaping across the Mississippi River.
Escaping from chains in the east to liberty in the west. An irony not lost on students of Southern University, Louisiana's oldest historically black university, founded at the eastern edge of that hopeful yet dangerous point.
It's overwhelming. I feel like I have a lot to prove because I'm here at Southern University and it was founded as an institution to educate blacks in Louisiana, and slaves, they weren't allowed to read or write. It's crazy because I'm taking advantage of the opportunities that they put for me, and to know that right behind me is where they escape for freedom I can't imagine it.
Definitely always been proud to call myself an alumni of Southern University, but now I definitely have more of a spiritual connection to it, knowing that my people had to swim across the river to get to freedom.
When you're enslaved and when you have been tortured and beaten, I suppose anything that might afford you freedom would be inviting.
Today, the river sustains jobs for more than 580,000 people, creating over $150 billion in revenue for the U.S. economy. Once a river of pain, but also a river of prosperity, a river of change. Reporting in Baton Rouge, I'm Lauren McCoy.
The river's place in black historical consciousness was cemented by a poem written by Langston Hughes. The lines included, quote, "I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset." That's a reference to President Lincoln's time working a flatboat on the river back in the 1830s. Many historians believe that had such a lasting impression on him, he took it with him on his way to Washington. James Jordan hung a picture of Abraham Lincoln over his mantle, and here it hangs, 150 years later. Next, another important home with hidden history. More than 200 years ago, hundreds of men, women, and children called this Whitney Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana home. But home didn't mean happiness or freedom, the tribute to its history and its people when Hidden History returns. You can truly appreciate the craftsmanship of this home just by looking at the staircase itself, solid wood that likely would have taken dozens of people to construct. Now, in its heyday, this home was considered very large, but well before the Jordan House, further south, plantation homes had already been built. One of those plantation homes in Wallace, Louisiana had been hidden away from public view until a man purchased it and unlocked the history, and within it the records of the enslaved people who lived and died there.
When the master rang this bell at any given moment,
it would mean an ever-present knowledge that someone was in control of your schedule, that you had to answer to someone for almost every minute of your life.
More than 200 years ago, hundreds of men, women, and children called this Whitney Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana home. But home didn't mean happiness or freedom.
I would suspect that their thoughts were of the long day ahead. You know, we know that they longed for freedom. They sustained each other through their families, through their relationships, through each other.
And some like Betty Thomas Ledette, a Baton Rouge resident, recalls vividly what she believes life was like on the grounds day in and day out.
Slavery impacted blacks both mentally, physically, financially, and spiritually. And all of that plays over into today, those particular things that happened to them.
Walking the plantation, one will get a feel for the horrible day-to-day lives that the slaves encountered through restored living quarters, memorial artwork, and through personal account narratives. Slave labor, toiling the land, working from sunup to sundown, but still having hope that one day they could be seen as a people they knew they were.
These were Americans, you know, just like we're Americans today. They were humans. They wanted the same things that you want. Wanted that freedom.
While we can't change what happened, some like John Cummings, through Whitney Plantation, can at least educate people by sharing real stories about a dark time in history. In Wallace, Louisiana, Deidre Wilson reporting.
Slave catchers would actively search for runaway slaves just like bounty hunters. And to stay out of their reach, men and women searching for freedom would actively search for clues left by sympathizers, such as quilts or other things hanging that would signal it was safe to pass.
Not only did white people hide fugitive slaves of this church, but they also made resolutions in the church that slavery was a sin.
A church way ahead of its time. What happened to this church more than 200 years ago that still resonates today when Hidden History returns? I'm standing in the hand-dug basement of the Jordan House. The West Des Moines Historical Society has turned this into a learning center about the Underground Railroad. Now, there were some secret passages in this home, but more than likely those running from slavery didn't stay here. They stayed in hidden areas outside of the walls. But the Underground Railroad wasn't just about those running from slavery. It was about a group of people committed to helping others, and it was a crucial route near the Canadian border.
Just off the shores of Lake Ontario in the quiet town of Volney, New York, stands a piece of history that changed the course of our nation forever.
Because of Lake Ontario and the way to escape the United States into Canada, this was a pathway in the Underground Railroad.
Bristol Hill Church, it was a safe haven for fugitive slaves. To understand its history, though, we sat down with Reverend Jim Hinman.
Silas Slater was African American,
who took us all the way back to 1812, when the church was organized in an unprecedented way.
We have documented records from the time that African American and European Americans built this church and formed this church.
So what are these right here?
I believe these are the benches that people sat on from 1835 to around 1900.
In this small sanctuary, a congregation of blacks and whites sat together, worshiped together, and fought together to end slavery.
Not only did white people hide fugitive slaves of this church, but they also made resolutions in the church that slavery was a sin.
In this original resolution, the church vowed to free slaves, and white and black abolitionists in the church hid them in their homes in Gilbert Mills. This home belonged to the Mason family. They were part of the Vigilance Committee who harbored slaves, and then within walking distance were two other safe havens. The rich history in this town cultivating unlikely relationships in the present day, specifically between Pastor Willie Mitchell and Reverend Hinman, along with his son, Pastor Andrew.
I can't really put it into words, but it was something that, a feeling of comfort and belonging. You know, like, we belonged and this relationship was meant to be. And right after that, we found all this information.
The relationship between the Hinmans and Pastor Mitchell somewhat reflective of the history of Bristol Hill. In Volney, I'm Jennifer Sanders reporting.
From the East Coast all the way to central Iowa, our country is rich with the hidden history of generations past. Yes, here in central Iowa, we have the Jordan House, but there's also much more that you should take in. Living History Farms, as well as the State Historical Building downtown, and many other places that you should keep your eyes open for that mark historical sites in our state. If you would like to visit the Jordan House, go to the West Des Moines Historical Society's website at wdmhs.org. You can schedule a tour there. We'd like to thank everybody at the Historical Society for the access and knowledge of the Jordan House and so much more. If you'd like to see all the stories we've put together for Black History Month, head over to weareiowa.com. I'm Elias Johnson, and thanks for joining us.